Hi, this is Pat Moorhead, CEO and Chief Analyst at Moor Insights and Strategy. Welcome to another Moor Insights and Strategy Insider podcast. I am joined by Scott Harrell, CEO of Infoblox, and we are going to get an update on what the company has done in the past year, some insights for 2024, and I think you're really going to enjoy a drill down on security in the era of generative AI. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pat. It is great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, it's when we first had a conversation, and we had some conversations at your prior employer, it was very clear that networking and security were coming together. And then there were also better ways to secure everything at a more fundamental level using DNS. And it's been a great year. I mean, not only have you brought out new offerings, right? You're educating people in the marketplace. And in fact, you rebranded the company with a focus on uniting networking and security. So how's the year been?
Well, I think probably all your listeners can relate to the paradox of when you have put yourself in a situation where maybe you're a little more uncomfortable, or maybe you're stretching yourself. That's actually sometimes the most fun you can have at work. And I got to say, this year I've had to learn new things, grow in new ways, and it's been a ton of fun. On the branding that you mentioned and the convergence of network and security, that mission's going extremely well. We continue to get converts from around the market as they realize the power you can have by bringing all the information we know from the networking side to bear on the security side. It can dramatically increase the visibility that is shared across the teams, get the collaboration functioning better, and more importantly, increase the speed from any kind of response for security incidents.
Yeah, I think it's, when anybody's talking about bringing two things together, I mean, there's an automatic response because, you have people that do security, and then you have people who do networking, and it really takes the posture of these two getting together, maybe even the CIO to see the ultimate value. And Scott, I don't hear anybody, questioning whether this is the right thing, but any type of transition, it takes time, and that's what I'm seeing. But you've made some really good progress along the way. So I have to ask though, what were some of the unexpected things that happened this year that maybe you didn't expect?
Patrick, the single biggest thing for me, at least, was the opportunity that's here. And that takes the form of the amount of people that are not using a professional grade service for the core thing we do from a networking point of view, which is to provide secure DNS and DHCP services. I have been shocked by how many people are not using a professional grade service. And the thing that kind of comes to my mind is a story that I heard one of the people I work with tell, which is, if you've ever seen anybody go fishing, like a big part of fishing, like golf and like other sports, is the gear, right? And so this guy goes out and he's really ready to up his game. And so he goes out and buys the latest state-of-the-art carbon fiber rod. And then he goes out and he gets with the same shop, he gets this new reel that's made from like NASA engineered materials. And they're like, okay, and here's some great line that we'll just give you for free because you spent so much money with us. And he heads out on the water and immediately hooks up on a big fish. The thing starts pulling on the rod, it's jumping out of the water. And, he's fighting it and starting to reel it in. And he starts to crank on the reel, and all of a sudden, bing, line snaps. And, this is kind of endemic of what I see here in this space for the DDI services or the DNS and DHCP services. A lot of people have stuck with what they got free 10, 20 years ago, which is the DNS and DHCP server that came with the Windows server. And to me, having been in networking for like 25 plus years, understanding this, finding this out was just stunning. Because when I started talking to our teams about where do we get most of our customers from, the number one way we get a customer is that somebody gets tired of repeated failures at their DNS layer or DHCP layer, not just a single failure in a year, repeated failures. And why this is so stunning to me is having worked in the network industry for a long time, if you had a switch fail, if you had a router fail, and it took down a branch or maybe a floor or a site, it was a massive deal. Like all hands went on deck. And here we have people running DNS as a best effort service on top of something that they got for free. And they're putting up with multiple failures a year that can take down the entire enterprise, can make all business cease, and for at least a particular region or potentially an entire company. That's just stunning to me. It's something that I was not expecting. And it's something that I'm now on a mission, a campaign to help go drive, that people take these mission critical network services and they treat them as such, especially as they start to bridge these to the hybrid and multi-cloud environments.
Yeah, Scott, as analysts, right, we are advisors to enterprises and companies, and also we're educators. And I'll admit, digging into this, I was a little bit surprised at the risks that people would take. And security companies always have to balance, bringing out this giant threat and scaring everybody, and telling this technological and truthful story. And that's one thing that I found myself in telling this DNS story, is that balance between that. But when you get down to the facts of what the threat is and what they're doing with DNS, I have yet to tell somebody to tell me, no, this isn't applicable. Okay. Every one of them has said, hey, this makes sense. And really the biggest challenge is just changing something. So, and, over the last year, I mean, that was a key learning, maybe an unexpected, surprise. You've also had a lot of accomplishments for Infoblox over the last year. Can you take us through some of these highlights?
Yeah, I mean, it has been something that I've been pushing the team a little bit more on, is how do we be loud and proud about some of the things that we have success on, that we're seeing the fruits of the labor on. And I'll go with, rather than kind of read off a list, I'll go with the one you brought up, Patrick, which is the security side. Yeah. Coming from a background, actually haven't done DNS security before. I was not new to that coming into this company. I thought I knew a lot about DNS security. And I got in here and I realized, well, wait a second, explain to me again how you're doing it. And what was interesting about Infoblox and what's interesting about how we approach security is it's fundamentally differentiated from anybody else in the market. And the reason for this is about 2.5 years ago, we actually pivoted what we do from a DNS security point of view to start to focus more and more of our original research on the supply chain of the attacker.
Right.
This is something that nobody else really does. And it's really something that's extremely powerful for DNS. If you think about, most crime TV shows you watch, most things you ever see about like drug cartels, there's always a supply chain. And you can go after the guy selling dime bags on the street corner. But if you can actually go after the supply chain, if you can actually go to the source of the attack and of the criminal activity, then that's much more effective than going after all the drug dealers on the street corners. And I think what DNS can do that's so powerful is almost every attacker leverages DNS as part of their supply chain. 92% plus of malware is using DNS. And I think the thing that the team has done is they've refined this, and what you see now starting to come out in a lot of the media articles is people starting to understand the power of this. Because if you can convict something via DNS, as soon as the domain is registered, it won't actually be used in a malware campaign in most cases for another 60, 90, 120, sometimes even longer days. But we can already start blocking proactively before that thing is ever used in a malicious campaign and before the malware is ever weaponized. And that's super powerful, because you think about most security out there, and haven't done, all the different pieces of this, they all rotate around the malware as a single source of truth. They're all watching for the malware to do something. So if you think about like an EDR is waiting for the file that's sitting on your system to do something before it can convict it. It's got to exhibit some behavior.
Right.
If you think about, a firewall, it's watching for outbound connections from a device that's already been breached and has already got malware on it. We're doing that as well. We're going to watch for all the outbound connections from the network, but we're adding to that before we ever even start looking at that, we're looking at who registered that domain, where it was registered, all the information about the server it sits on, all the information that we can find about anything related to that domain. And we're often convicting that domain as malicious within 24 hours after it's registered, which means you get an extra 60, 90, 120-day head start on that malware actor. And this is true defense in depth, because we're looking at something different than just the malware. We're looking at the supplier infrastructure as well. And that's something that when you look at some of the campaigns that we've unearthed in the last year, like Prolific Puma, which is the most recent one,
right,
or Decoy Dog, which is that, there are things that nobody else has found. Some of the stuff like Prolific Puma had been around for 4 years and nobody had actually known it existed until we actually started to really deep dive into the DNS infrastructure. So I'm really proud of the team. I think that's something that I think is a success that's really started to come to be more visible this year. And I'm hoping as we carry forward into the next couple of years that you'll become even more understood and more relevant to all of our users.
Yeah, I've been impressed with you rolling out, your PhDs and this idea of getting at it before it comes in. It's funny. We've kind of, not that we've written off perimeter-based defense, but the way that I look at it is, you have the target right here, and you still have to get ahead of it. And getting ahead of it before it gets in might sound like a no-brainer, but the ability to shut off access before they've actually come in and tried to do something bad to you as an enterprise, it makes pragmatic sense. Yeah. And because the less people that, even though as an industry, we kind of accepted people are going to get past the perimeter, they're going to get in, then we need to get them out, and we need to fix any damage that may have been done. But getting a better perimeter helps everything, right? Less people are going to come in.
If you can keep the malware from ever being weaponized, then you don't have as many responses to do. And if you don't have as many responses to do, and as many detections to do that lead to the response, you're going to be more effective as a security organization. But we do recognize that some stuff's still going to get through. Like, it's inevitable. Somebody's going to plug in a USB drive. Somebody's going to do something that they shouldn't have done. They're going to be off net and somehow get infected. And so we also, want to help with the response side. And I think that's back to that conversation we talked about on the network and security. How do I make it so that when a device is breached, you can be as effective and as fast as possible in figuring out which device that is, the relative criticality of that device, and then responding. And that's something we're also very committed to and continuing to innovate on. And you'll see a lot more about that as we look to the start of the new year, when we have come out with a new launch around how do we better make our data even more actionable than it is today.
Yeah, so let's talk about 2024. And I'd like to dial out and talk about innovation. Sure. As it relates to, the CEOs of your customers, CIOs and CISOs. What should they be thinking of ahead as they look to innovate in 2024? My guess is not all their strategic planning is done for 2024, even though it's this time of year. It's a perpetual strategic planning. But what are you recommending here?
Yeah, there's a lot of things we can talk about, but I'm going to go into one in particular, which is the need for speed, right? Every CIO I talk to, at the end of the day, what they're graded on is how great are the applications that the business units can deliver, how fast can they get them out, and how available are they a lot of times. And so when I think about where we need to go in 24 and beyond, is you need to be thinking ahead about what happens as this scales, what happens as I need to go incrementally even faster. We kind of walked into the cloud a lot like we walked into on-prem networking. We leveraged kind of whatever tools were there. We strung them all together, oftentimes using, kind of duct tape and baling wire. We got it up and running, we got going. And what I think we need to do is take a step back and say, okay, let's not repeat the sins of the past. Let's not create a system that's inherently brittle, where you haven't really invested in the foundation of your services to make sure that they can scale securely and reliably, no matter how many workloads you have, no matter how fast the organization wants to go. And so bring in a thinking about, what are those foundational elements of your multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment, thinking about those today, I think something that will help you go much faster in the future. And we're seeing this with a lot of our customers. We're investing heavily in how do we actually evolve DNS for a hybrid multi-cloud environment? How do we evolve IP address management from a hybrid multi-cloud environment? And we know it's a problem because we're talking to all the major cloud vendors and they're working with us. They're helping us design what the next generation of this looks like right now so that we can abstract all the complexity from our customers and we can make it super simple for however they want to run, whether they want to use native PaaS services like Route 53 or Azure DNS, or whether they want to use us. How do we string all this together and make it so that it works seamlessly and it's easy for the developer, it's easy for the cloud ops team, it's easy for the NetOps team to work in this hybrid multi-cloud work? Because the reality is, while it simplified the life for the developers, it actually created some complexity for the networking and security teams and the cloud ops teams, and we want to help solve that. And I think if you're a CIO and you're not thinking about how the system's going to scale, how it's going to continue to be secure and reliable, if I go from 100 developer teams, maybe smaller scale, go from 20 to 100 developer teams to maybe 200 development teams working in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment, how do I keep up with that? How do I not become an inhibitor to their progress? And I think that really starts by having a robust foundation.
Yeah, Scott, I'm so glad you brought up the hybrid multi-cloud. I was in the minority a bit when I was talking through that, and 10 years ago, giving my future forecast of how this would play out. And a lot of people thought my firm was crazy because this was when there were the board directives to just do public cloud and move it all there. So here we are 14 years after the invention of the public cloud. 90% of the spend is still on-prem or on the edge, and 75% of the data is still on premises. Yeah. So the answer to all this, and by the way, I'm not a public cloud denier either, because the growth rates there are amazing. But each one of these enterprises had to stand up different silos for every one of these public clouds. And it was kind of like back in the day of mainframe, mini computer, and x86 servers, right? Having different teams. But that's very inefficient. So having a hybrid multi-cloud fabric, right, for DNS, for security, networking, it just makes sense. And it is the future. And you building that out, whether it's supporting on-prem data center, the edge, sovereign cloud, average Fortune 500 company has 2 to 3 IaaS providers. And oh, by the way, you buy a company and you might have 4, right? So the future is that in a way to provide these services. So I'm glad you're on that track. I think it's just immensely interesting. And I think customers will be flocking to you in ever increasing roles once they understand this. So great talk about hybrid multi-cloud, about innovation. What are maybe 2 to 3 more, if you have more of them, trends here in the future that these leaders should be looking out for and thinking about in 2024?
Yeah, the single biggest one on my mind that I haven't seen actually, other than some hype cycle stuff, really written in a thoughtful way about, is around how AI is going to be leveraged by the attackers, and specifically like the new LLMs. I see a lot of hyperbole about it, but like actually what's it going to look like? And I think if you kind of take a step back and you're a little bit thoughtful about it, what you'll kind of, at least it'd be great to get your point of view, Patrick, but kind of what you will kind of start to think about is, well, I think the average attacker is start to look a lot more sophisticated and potentially start to run exploit and campaigns that look a lot more like nation state campaigns.
Right.
And the reason for that is the economics change. It's going to become things that they had to do to be personalized attacks for an individual enterprise, for an individual person, didn't used to make economic sense for the average attacker. Now they're going to get more efficient in producing code. They can actually have the AI craft unique things on its own, and they can start to become more specific in their attacks. And so what does that mean? Well, if I look at the industry's response primarily is, okay, we're going to fight AI with AI, and we're going to try to make you better at response because we know you're going to have many, many more incidents, and they're going to be probably unique to you, and you're not going to be rely on the vendor community. And to me, this is kind of treating the symptom, not going after the root cause of the problem. And if you think about the fact that there's going to not be patterns as much anymore that you can rely on, that's going to become a real problem for detection. Because if you're reliant on patterns for detection, which is what most systems are, they have to have seen the malware somewhere in the world. They have to have reverse engineered the malware before. Your EDR may become less effective. Your firewall may become less effective. In general, your kill chain will become less effective in detecting these things. But you'll still get many more alerts because there'll be all kinds of new variants, and you'll have to scale your responses. So what do you do? Well, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is you have to become more proactive. You have to look at the problem a different way, fundamentally. And if you're worried about AI, then you got to think differently. And I think this is something that I don't see discussed enough. And this is part of why, we've doubled down on what we talked about earlier, that Dr. Renee Burton's team is doing, which is becoming more proactive in our detection methodology, starting to look 60, 90 days ahead before a domain has ever been weaponized and starting to convict it with very low regrets. And I think if you're going to start to think about this, you need to start to think differently. The second piece is, when you think about the response side, I do, by the way, believe in AI being used on the response side. I think that's absolutely going to need to be done. But I also think you need to look at the data set that you're pulling in. When you think about what AI can do, especially LLMs, they can actually work on unstructured data better than any other tools out in the market. And if you can give them more data, they will draw more conclusions. They will help you move faster. And it comes back to how are you going to get that data? Where is it going to be sourced from? I think the network is one of the best repositories for that. And if you're going to prioritize, some things as you look to the next year from a security point of view, you need to be thinking about how you're going to get more information into that system, and we can help with that as well. And that's to me, it's a little bit fortunate in our way that I believe the puck's coming towards us, but there's also a lot of thought and planning that had gone into that that's leading us towards that. But I'd be curious what you think, Patrick, about that.
Yeah. So Scott, as analysts, we try not to pretend that we know everything because we don't, and that we can still learn. And this has been a learning journey for me. And, I used to do lazy analyst, which was, hey, it's spy versus spy. We're doing AI versus AI. What I hadn't quite thought through was the pattern matching that machine learning, and in many cases, deep learning does. Now with LLMs and foundational models, it's more of a learning system. It's more comprehensive. It can pretend to be a human much better than on machine learning. And getting ahead and getting downstream makes pragmatic sense. And I like what you said about AI for response, but getting ahead of it with AI and being able to do better jobs of predicting where those will come from. So,
and one of the things that you mentioned that I got to double down on too is the user side of this. We as security people have always said, well, the user is the last line of defense. You want to talk about something that's going to completely erode as part of this. That user, even the most sophisticated users, are going to start getting tricked all the time. Because you can impersonate from a chatbot point of view on like text and get somebody to fall for a smish. You can certainly do deep fakes now that are not actually that hard to do. You control the internet and pull together all kinds of information and use that in your campaign in ways that you couldn't do at scale before. I mean, it's gonna get to be where the user is no longer a last line of defense. And so again, like the defenses are changing of what you need to do and how you need to think about how you're going to protect your networks.
It is a scary future, but it sounds like
I'm actually an AI optimist, by the way, believe it or not. It may not sound like it, but I actually think it's going to be great for the economy, great for the world. But it is something you have, there's always downsides to new technology.
Scott, you're exactly right. Whether it's elevators, electricity, cars, combustion engines. I mean, I've researched that pretty heavily, and yeah, knowing that there are going to be some downsides with the amazing upsides is I don't know, being an adult. But it's good to see that you're aligning your resources to be able to take on these future challenges. And that's where I want to end this conversation here. What's your vision for the company? It hasn't changed, but what do we expect to see that you'll bring out in 2024?
Yeah, one of the big things I've really focused on since coming is invigorating the innovation engine. And at the highest level, I'd probably say there's 4 things that I have the team focused on. One is how do we improve visibility? 2 is the multi-cloud hybrid cloud networking piece. 3 is AI, and 4 is simplicity. And if we think about visibility, we've historically been a great source of information about what's connected to your network. But I want to take that a step further. I want to have visibility across any IP address associated with your environment. So what does that mean? That means now we have to bring visibility to the cloud, and we have to actually be able to show you all the stuff interconnected in the cloud as well as on-prem. So in your IS infrastructure, you might have a virtual load balancer, you'll have VPCs, you'll have workloads, you'll have all this stuff that now you want to have visibility to as you're tracking down threats. The same goes for the IoT and OT side. Historically, we've kind of been a best effort shop at those. We're both going to build some new capabilities there using some of the newer AI techniques, but also we're going to bring in third-party data through some new ecosystem capabilities we built so that we can become an incredible repository for visibility, which anchors your networking processes, but also, as we talked about earlier, feeds all your security response. The second big thing around hybrid multi-cloud is we're going to continue to innovate here in trying to make it simpler to manage things like your IP address state across the multi-cloud. We're re-envisioning how we build that and working directly with the hyperscalers, the IS providers, to do that in a way that is not only great for your on-premise state and is revolutionary for that, but also completely rethinks how you do IP address management, because the Kubernetes world, these are more ephemeral and they often go unused and you end up with zombie servers in the cloud. And so how do we help you manage that at scale in a very fast manner that allows you to be as efficient as possible? So things like this in hybrid multi-cloud are new domains that we're going to go after. And then the third one is around AI. We talked a little bit about the impact of AI, but we're going to, just like we talked about, we're going to use AI as well. And we're going to use it in multiple different ways. The 2 that'll kind of come out in the first half of next year, one is around how do we refine the insights we give you from a security point of view. As I mentioned, I do believe AI has a role to play in response. And we're investing in kind of becoming a DNS detection and response vendor. And we think we've led the market on that. And we want to stretch that again. And part of that is taking the AI and using it to actually compress the data in such a way that you go from maybe 1,000 alerts to 5 you really care about. And 2 or 3 of those, we'll take care of you. If you let us, we'll take care of automatically for you. The other 2, maybe you have to go investigate. Right. We need to have that kind of force reduction to really have an impact. The second way is really around simplicity. And how do we use AI to actually start to come alongside you and help you do your job better when you're using our tools so that you can scale easier and you can handle a hybrid multi-cloud world. And that kind of leads to the fourth element, which is in general simplicity. We're investing in how do we actually take all the systems and taking a look back at all the workflows. How do we make it faster to get to time to deployment? How do we make it easier for you to migrate off legacy systems? How do we actually make the actual workflows simpler recursively? These are things that historically we hadn't spent as much time on. We were an expert system, Infoblox was. We took a lot of pride in the fact that we built systems that could be used and were so powerful and had all the capabilities that if you were really an expert, you could do almost anything with our system. I want to take it a step further and say, hey, that's great, but we also want to make it so that anybody who's not an expert can look like an expert. So that your tier one NOC analyst, tier one SOC analyst can look like a tier 2, tier 3 escalation analyst. And that's where we're going next, is those kind of 4 principles around visibility, cloud, AI, and simplicity. And you'll see a lot of it starting to roll out, because we changed a lot of this last year, but it'll start to come out in the first half of this year.
Yeah. So Scott, anybody who paid attention to the first 20 or so minutes of this conversation, the 4 things you're leaning into for 2024 just makes sense. I've never heard anybody say, make my product harder. And the experience, and what's happening is the complexity, it gets more complex.
Yeah.
And it has
to recursively simplify, right? Otherwise,
Exactly. And like we've seen, even with consumer products, it's harder to make a very complex product easy. And it's an art as opposed to a science. And sometimes it means prioritization on things that you don't need. And as sterling as the idea on is what I need, also what I don't need, but adding the intelligence, I feel like we can have our cake and eat it too, with AI to make things simpler. And quite frankly, with LLMs and foundational models, I feel like we're finally at the point as an industry, we're paying off the promises that were made not just 10 years ago, but back in the 1960s when the first AI algorithms were created, and science fiction, right? I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the future picture of what we are, we're the Isaac Asimovs of the world, and Star Wars and things like this. And we're finally at the point where the reality is aligning with the promise in AI, and it's a super exciting future.
You're on my jam now. I love the sci-fi movies, man, and the books. I always find it fascinating how they get like 80% of the future right, oftentimes 20, 30 years in advance, right, in some of these books. And yeah, I do think the AI assistant, the co-pilot kind of capabilities you can bring to bear can be transformative. But also, if you think about the generative capabilities of some of this stuff, I think the whole user interface will change, because it'll become, instead of a static interface, it'll become a generative interface that, hey, I need to know about this, and the tool will generate it. That might be a step further down the road. But I think the user interaction, of course, the chat piece will be there, but I think it'll even go further as we look forward and start to become a much more interactive, dynamic kind of set of tools. And I'm super excited about it. Like, this is the stuff that gets you into technology to begin with, is the ability to take these things and bring them to bear on your systems.
Scott, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and, giving us, quite frankly, an update on exactly what you've done with the company, innovations to look out for in 2024, and some really fundamental, awesome thinking on security that, as an analyst, we never like to admit it, but I've learned something, and I'm sure our audience has too.
Hey, Patrick and Pat, it's been awesome to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and the audience as well.
Sounds good. So you heard it here first, update on Infoblox, what's been going on, what we're looking at to the future. Appreciate you tuning in. Check out the More Insights and Strategy podcast for all of the networking and security action, and check out our website. We've written a lot of what I think are insightful things on networking and security. We've talked a lot about Infoblox as well. Take care, and thanks for tuning in.